today's lesson is going to be solving quadratic word problems. We've done word problems in the past, but now they're going to be ones that are quadratic, so you're going to have to factor in order to solve. Just like any word problem, make sure that you define the variable, set up a quadratic equation, and then you're going to solve. So the first one says the square of a number increased by 2 times that number equals 8. Find the number. So x equals, define the variable, x equals the number. What's going to happen is the square of the number increased by 2 times that number. So the square of that number increased by 2 times that number is equal to 8. It's a quadratic. We need to set the equation equal to 0, factor, and solve. So x squared plus 2x, how does the 8 come from the right to the left? And you got to move it over by subtraction, equal to 0. This has got 3 terms. There is no GCF. It's an IM. So what two numbers are going to add to 2 but multiply to negative 8? And that would be x positive 4 and x minus 2. Now what's left to do is solve this by drawing down your line, taking each factor, setting it equal to 0, and then solving for each equation. So then the answers come out to be x equals negative 4 and x equals negative 2. Both of those numbers will work. It didn't ask for a positive number or a negative number. So in this case, negative 4 and positive 2 are solutions to this problem. Sometimes you'll throw out an answer depending on what kind of question you have. Take a look at the second one. The length of a rectangle is twice its width. The area of the rectangle is 50 square feet. Find the number of feet in the length. Well, we know little about, or least about, we should say, the width. So if x is going to be equal to the width, and the length is twice the width, then your length becomes 2x. We know that the area of a rectangle is always going to be base times height, or in this case, length times width. They tell you that the area of the rectangle is, in fact, 50 square feet. So we know that if we multiply the width times the length, we're going to get the answer to be 50. When we multiply these two pieces together, and I usually like to have parentheses around them as opposed to that little multiplication piece in there, this becomes 2x squared equals 50. Well, it's a quadratic. We've got to set it equal to 0, factor, and solve, which means keep the x squared where it is, subtract 50 from both sides, and that's what allows you to set the equation equal to 0. Well, how do we factor this? It's got 2 terms and there is a GCF. So the GCF gets pulled out. What's left over becomes x squared minus 25. The polynomial left over happens to be a dots problem, so we're going to factor that by dots. The GCF doesn't go anywhere, but we factor into x minus 5 and x plus 5. In terms of solving for x, we've got 2 places where we see an x. Bring this up a little bit. So then we've got x minus 5 equal to 0, in which the solution is x equals 5. We've got x plus 5 equal to 0, in which the solution is x equals negative 5. Well, we have to go back to the question which says find the number of feet in the length of the rectangle. That's okay. So find the number of feet in the length of the rectangle. Well, we know that if we use the width to be 5, then the length would have to be 10. That's using this solution. And in terms of using this solution, we can't even use it because we can't have a width that's a negative measure. So in this case, the negative 5 gets thrown out as a solution of this particular rectangle problem. It's a solution of the quadratic, it's not the solution of the problem. So find the number of feet in the length. We should know that the length then is equal to 10 feet. Okay, let's take a look at another one. This one, one leg of a right triangle is more than the other by 4 inches. The hypotenuse is 20 inches. Find the length of the shorter leg. Well, they're talking about a right triangle, so that should kind of clue you into something. So here's the right triangle. You know for sure that the hypotenuse is 20. And it says one leg exceeds the other by 4 inches, which means one of the legs has to be x. It doesn't matter which one you choose. But then the other leg is going to have to be 4 more than that. Exceeds, which means greater than, more than. So how do we find the length of the shorter leg? Well, in a right triangle, don't forget there's the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. If we were to go around our triangle and talk about A, we could say that one leg was A, the other leg is B, and the hypotenuse then becomes C. It's always going to be C. So as we start doing this, we're going to say leg A squared plus leg B squared equals hypotenuse squared. You need to understand that this one leg is a binomial. And the only way to square a binomial is you're going to have to use the distributive property. You're going to have to FOIL it out. So what's nice is x squared just becomes x squared. 20 squared becomes 400. But FOILing out x plus 4 squared is going to turn into this. X squared plus 4x plus 4x plus 16. So we need to be able to combine like terms here. That was the short leg. This was the hypotenuse. When we combine like terms, you should see that there are two x squareds. There's 8x plus 16 equal to 400. We have to set the equation equal to 0. 400 has to be subtracted to both sides in order to become 0. So I'm going to do this kind of in my head a little bit. 2x squared plus 8x. When I subtract 400 from 16, what's going to happen is you're going to get negative 384. And remember, you subtracted 400 from itself. That's how you moved it over to the left, equal to 0. We got to factor this thing, and there's a GCF. All the numbers are even. The GCF is a 2. What's left over? X squared plus 4x minus 192 equal to 0. What's left over in your parentheses can be factored by I am. These numbers are kind of big. We're not going to give you such big numbers on the quiz because you don't have a calculator, but I do know that 16 and negative 12 multiply to negative 192 and they add to 4. So what's going to happen here is this factored form would be 2, that GCF, x plus 16, x minus 12 equal to 0. And then when we solve for the x's, we know that in this factor, x would be negative 16. We know that with this factor, x would be 12. Well, we're talking about a real-world situation here, and we're dealing with triangles. So the shorter leg has to be x, right? Because if you take a look at the triangle up here, our shorter leg is going to be this guy. And in terms of lengths, you can't have negative 16 be the length of anything. It's a negative measure, which means your shortest leg has to be 12, and then the answer would be 12 inches. Again, sometimes you're going to be throwing out answers. Even though they really are solutions to the problem, they won't make sense in the actual scenario of the problem. All right, that's a tricky one. I see that on the Regents, by the way. Here's the next one and the last one for that. Okay. The sum of the squares of two consecutive even integers, oh, they're back, consecutive even integers, is 164. Find the integers. Integers can be positive and negative, so keep that in mind. So we're looking for consecutive integers, and we need 2 of them. X will always be the first number. x plus 2 then becomes the second number. The sum of the squares, which means I'm going to square the first number, I'm going to add it to the square of the second number, and my answer is going to come out to be 164. Well, the first number, that's kind of easy because the first number is just x, but the second number is x plus 2. So I'm going to have to square my first number, add it to the square of the second for 164. Well, this is not a big deal, but don't forget that this has to be distributed, FOIL it out. This really is x plus 2 times itself. So when I do that, it's going to give me x squared plus 4x plus 4. I did some stuff in my head. I did the outsides and insides, and I combined them already. Equals to 164. Combine your like terms. 2x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 164. Set the equation equal to 0. Bring this 164 to the left by subtraction. 2x squared plus 4x minus 160 equal to 0. Subtracted 164 from both sides. Turns out that there is a GCF, which is 2. What's left over is x squared plus 2x minus 80 equal to 0. Inside that parenthesis, I do have an I am. I can definitely think of numbers on my own without a calculator that multiply to 80 negative, but add to 2, and that's going to be 10 and 8. So the GCF still comes down, x plus 10, x minus 8 equal to 0. When I solve for x, out of this factor, x is negative 10. And when I solve for x out of this factor, x is 8. We've got a negative and a positive, but it's asking us to find the integers. So both of those answers are fine to keep. All right, we don't have to throw one out. Integers are both positive and negative. So one set of answers would be if I took x to be negative 10, right? If I took this one, if x was negative 10 and I add 2 to it, the next number would be negative 8. The other answer, if I'm now going to use x to be 8, would be if x is 8, then the other number would be 10. And that makes sense because if I square both of those numbers and add them together, I get 164. That's it. Good luck with the homework.